New York, August 1939. The humidity of the summer clings to the streets like a wet shroud, but inside a modest cabin in Peconic, Long Island, the air feels unnervingly cold. Two men sit across from one another. One is the world's most famous face, a pacifist with wild hair and eyes that seem to see into the very fabric of the cosmos. Albert Einstein. The other is a nervous, frantic Hungarian physicist named Leo Szilard. Between them lies a stack of paper, 12 pages that would eventually weigh more than the world itself. There are no explosions yet, no blinding flashes of light over the Pacific. Just the sound of a pen scratching against parchment. Einstein hesitates, the ink drying on the nib. He knows that by signing this, he is making a pact with a demon that science may never be able to put back in the bottle. But the alternative is worse. In the distance, across the Atlantic, the shadow of the swastika is lengthening. Rumors have reached the halls of Princeton and Columbia. Rumors of German scientists working late into the night at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. Rumors of uranium. Einstein sighs, the sound lost in the rustle of the trees outside, and begins to sign. In that moment, the fate of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the Cold War was sealed. This is the story of the 12-page letter that launched the atomic age. This is the paper trail to Armageddon. For decades, we have been told the story of the Manhattan Project as a feat of engineering, a race of hammers and steel. But the true origin of the sun falling to Earth was not a laboratory in Los Alamos. It was a desperate correspondence between two men who realized that the only way to stop a monster was to build a bigger one. Welcome to Annalist. To understand how 12 pages of text could change the course of human history, we must first travel back to a world on the brink of collapse. The late 1930s was a decade defined by the silence before the storm. In laboratories across Europe, the impossible was becoming reality. In late 1938, the German chemists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann accidentally discovered nuclear fission. They had split the atom. To the average citizen, this was an abstract curiosity of physics. To Leo Szilard, it was a death warrant. Szilard was a man who lived in the future. Years earlier, while crossing a street in London, he had a sudden, terrifying realization. If you could find an element that is split by neutrons and which would emit 2 neutrons, when it is struck by 1 neutron, you could create a chain reaction. You could create an explosion of unimaginable power. By 1939, Szilard was a refugee in America, watching with growing horror as his homeland fell to the Nazi machine. He knew that if the Germans mastered the chain reaction first, the world would be lost. But there was a problem. Szilard was an outsider, a frantic intellectual with no political weight. He needed a voice that the President of the United States could not ignore. He needed the voice of a god. He needed Einstein. July 12, 1939. Szilard and fellow physicist Eugene Wigner drive to Long Island. The mission: to warn the Belgian government about their uranium stockpiles in the Congo and to alert President Roosevelt. The obstacle: Einstein, a committed pacifist, was initially unaware that a nuclear chain reaction was even possible. When Szilard explained the concept of a chain reaction to Einstein in that Long Island cabin, Einstein's response was a whisper of dread. Daran habe ich gar nicht gedacht. I had not thought of that. It is one of history's greatest ironies. The man who unlocked the secrets of the universe with ECCMC had not considered its most violent application until it was presented to him as a political necessity. The letter was drafted not as a scientific paper, but as a warning of an existential threat. The draft went through several iterations. It spoke of the vast power of uranium, the possibility of bombs that could destroy an entire port and the surrounding territory, and most importantly, it warned that Germany had already stopped the sale of uranium from the Czechoslovakian mines they had seized. But how do you get a letter into the hands of a president who is busy trying to keep a nation out of a European war? Enter Alexander Sachs, an economist and close friend of Franklin D. Roosevelt. He promised to deliver the document personally, but he warned Szilard, "The president is a busy man. If you want him to listen, this can't be a memo. It has to be a story." As the weeks passed, Szilard's anxiety grew. Every day the letter sat on a desk was another day the Germans spent refining ore. The tension was unbearable. The world was sliding toward September 1st, 1939, the day the tanks would roll into Poland, and the most important letter in history was still tucked inside an envelope. The clock was ticking. While the letter waited for its moment, the world as they knew it began to fracture. On September 1st, 1939, German Stukas screamed over the Polish border. The phony war had ended, and the true nightmare had begun. For Leo Szilard, the invasion of Poland wasn't just a military maneuver. It was a signal that the window of opportunity was closing. If Hitler's scientists were as far ahead as he feared, the Allies were already walking toward a guillotine. It wasn't until October 11th, 1939, that Alexander Sachs finally walked into the Oval Office. President Roosevelt sat behind his heavy desk, the weight of a neutral nation on his shoulders. Sachs knew he couldn't just hand over a dry, technical document. He began by telling the president a story about the Napoleonic Wars. He recounted how a young American inventor named Robert Fulton had approached Napoleon with a plan for a fleet of steamships that could cross the English Channel in any weather, allowing the French to invade England. Napoleon, blinded by tradition, dismissed the idea as nonsense. Sachs looked Roosevelt in the eye and said, "Mr. President, had Napoleon shown more imagination and restraint, the history of the 19th century would have been very different." Roosevelt was a man of history. He understood the subtext immediately. "Alex," the president said, "what you are after is to see that the Nazis don't blow us up." "Precisely," Sachs replied. Roosevelt called in his aide, General Edwin P.A. Watson, and pointed to the 12 pages of Einstein and Szilard's warning. His command was brief, but it would change the world forever. This requires action. But action in a democracy is a slow, grinding gear. What followed was not an immediate explosion of activity, but a series of bureaucratic hurdles. The initial response was the formation of the Briggs Committee, a small group of military and scientific minds given a meager budget of just $6,000 to buy graphite and uranium. To Szilard, this was an insult. $6,000 to fight a potential apocalypse? He felt like he was screaming into a vacuum. He realized that the letter had opened the door, but it hadn't yet convinced the generals that physics could win a war. October 1939, the first meeting of the Advisory Committee on Uranium. The skepticism, military officials at the meeting mocked the idea of a single bomb destroying a city, calling it comic book science. The catalyst. It took the British Maud Committee report and the falling of bombs on London to finally convince the U.S. that this was no longer a theoretical exercise. As the months bled into 1940 and 1941, the atmosphere in the American scientific community shifted. The Republic of Science, once defined by the free exchange of ideas, began to go dark. Journals stopped publishing papers on nuclear physics. Names like Fermi, Lorentz, and Oppenheimer began to disappear from the public eye. The letter had done something Szilard hadn't fully anticipated. It had turned his beautiful, transparent science into a classified state secret. The archives show a growing tension between the scientists and the military. The scientists wanted to save the world. The military wanted a gadget that could end a war. The golden thread of this mystery lies in a hidden realization. Einstein, the man whose signature started it all, was soon pushed to the sidelines. Because of his pacifist leanings and his German background, the FBI considered him a security risk. The man who birthed the idea was denied the security clearance to see it through. Imagine Einstein sitting in his study in Princeton, watching the news, knowing that somewhere in the hidden corners of America, in places like Oak Ridge and Los Alamos, thousands of people were now working on a project he had triggered, yet he was forbidden from knowing their progress. The silence was deafening. History is often written in the ink of secret letters and classified memos. If you want to uncover more stories that were never meant for the public eye, hit the subscribe button and join us as we explore the shadows of the archives. Let's return to the moment the ink turned into fire. By 1942, the small uranium committee had evolved into a titan. The Manhattan Project was born. The 12 pages had successfully moved the project from the desks of dreamers to the hands of the most powerful military-industrial complex in history. But as the first reactors began to hum in Chicago, the men who wrote the letter began to have second thoughts. Szilard, the man who had chased Einstein down on a Long Island beach, was now terrified of what he had unleashed. He realized that the Germans were not as far along as he had feared. The threat that justified the bomb was evaporating, yet the machine he started was only gaining speed. He began to write another letter, a letter to stop what the first one had started. By 1944, the momentum of the Manhattan Project was an unstoppable freight train. What had begun as a 12-page warning was now a $2 billion empire, employing over 130,000 people. Deep in the deserts of New Mexico, at a place called Los Alamos, the gadget was taking shape. But as the Allied intelligence mission, Alsos, moved into liberated Europe, they discovered a shocking truth. The German nuclear program was a failure. The Nazi scientists had never even come close to a self-sustaining chain reaction. The existential threat that Leo Szilard had used to convince Roosevelt was gone. Hitler was dead, and Germany was in ruins. For Szilard, the logic for the bomb had vanished. He believed that if the threat was gone, the weapon should remain a secret, a deterrent, not a tool of execution. He desperately tried to reach the president again. He drafted a petition signed by 70 scientists, arguing that using the bomb against Japan without a specific warning would be a moral catastrophe. But the 12-page letter had been too successful. It had birthed a bureaucracy that no longer needed its creators. Roosevelt was dead, and the new president, Harry S. Truman, was surrounded by advisors who saw the bomb not as a tragedy, but as a diplomatic masterstroke. The scientists who had opened the door were now being locked out of the room. July 16, 1945, the Trinity test, the first atomic explosion in history. The reaction. "Now we are all sons of bitches," remarked Kenneth Bainbridge, the test director. The silence. In Princeton, Einstein waited for news, but none came through official channels. He was a spectator to the end of the world he helped define. Then came August 6, 1945. At 8:15 a.m., the sun rose twice over Hiroshima. When the news reached Einstein, his reaction was a gut-wrenching moan. His secretary, Helen Dukas, recalled him saying only 5 words: "Oh, weh ist mir," woe is me. The man of peace had provided the key to the ultimate cage. The 12-page letter, written to save the world from fascism, had just incinerated 70,000 people in a heartbeat. The aftermath was a period of profound intellectual mourning. In the archives of the post-war era, we find letters from Szilard and Einstein that drip with a sense of betrayal. They realized that they had misunderstood the nature of power. They thought they were giving a tool to a rational leadership. They didn't realize that a weapon, once created, dictates its own use. 1946. Einstein becomes the chairman of the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists. The mission: to advocate for world government and nuclear disarmament. The regret. Einstein famously told Newsweek, "Had I known that the Germans would not succeed in producing an atomic bomb, I never would have lifted a finger." The hidden truth of this story isn't just about the physics of the atom. It's about the physics of fear. The 12-page letter was born of fear, a fear so potent it forced a pacifist to call for a weapon of mass destruction. It proves that in the theater of history, even the most brilliant minds can be blinded by the shadows of their time. As we look back from the modern world, those 12 pages are more than just historical documents. They are a mirror. They reflect the eternal dilemma of the scientist, the responsibility for what you discover. Today, the original letter sits in the Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library, the ink fading, but the words still vibrating with the energy that reshaped our reality. The silence of the archives reminds us that while it took only 12 pages to launch the atomic age, we have written millions of pages since then, trying to figure out how to survive it. History is not just a collection of dates, it is a series of choices. And sometimes the most dangerous choice is simply picking up a pen. History is full of shadows. To explore them with us, subscribe and turn on notifications. The past is never truly dead. It's just waiting to be read.